China's social credit system, is it destined to be Orwellian? Or just a myth? Outline. This presentation has three main parts. First, we present our question and argument. Next, we provide a brief overview of the social credit system in China. Third, we discuss in detail how the various theoretical frameworks and concepts may apply to the social credit system. Question. Argument. We seek to use different theoretical frameworks and concepts to explore the impact China's social credit system, or SCS, has on its society. Will the public sphere disappear? Our group posits that if the SCS is implemented in its full form with comprehensive economic and social controls, PRC citizens will reject and resist the SCS, especially against its social controls. In this light, more research can be done to better understand Chinese society, how PRC citizens may react to the SCS economic and social moral controls. At this point, despite Western media's portrayal of SCS in perpetuating authoritarianism, totalitarianism in China, the SCS has not been fully implemented and has its limits. The narrative that the SCS will strengthen China as a surveillance state, dominating all aspects economic and social life, does not reflect reality. Political economy perspectives, with their emphasis on structural control and means of production, have somewhat reinforced Western media narratives on the SCS being used by the state to dominate PRC society. On the other hand, cultural studies present more nuanced and positive views of the SCS, broadly as a system to promote good Chinese values on governance, morality and social harmony, thus benefiting Chinese society. We posit that critical political economy approaches may provide a more holistic understanding on how PRC citizens' attitudes towards, and how they may react against the SCS. For example, more research may be done to understand the social psychology of PRC citizens, how they may react to the effects of SCS. Lastly, we imagine the scenario where the SCS is being fully implemented in China. We are of the view that the public sphere, as conceptualized by Habermas, will vanish. But at the same time, this may cause resistance from the PRC citizens. What is the social credit system? China's digital landscape is characterized famously as the Great Firewall of China, of which the state, represented by the Chinese Communist Party or CCP, controls most aspects of digital communications infrastructure, of which the SCS operates in. The SCS can be considered a form of media as it enables the state to convey its messages on economic and social governance to the PRC public, albeit a top-down, one-way traffic. In 2014, the State Council of China promulgated the outline for the development of a social credit system, 2014 to 2020. The SCS has been described as a system of credit scores for business owners, civil servants, the judiciary and all PRC citizens. Broadly, the SCS is intended to promote and implement good governance, on China's terms, by exacting significant control on economic and social moral spheres in PRC society. One key characteristic of the SCS is the use and centralization of data by the state, such as government agencies and corporate actors, such as tech companies like Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, to resolve issues of non-compliance that affects market order in China, as well as to eventually promote socialist morality based on Chinese values of trustworthiness and credibility. The state and corporate actors' data monopoly enables them to have comprehensive surveillance on PRC society. In reality, it is important to note that at this juncture, the SCS does not exist as a unified system yet. While the central authorities have introduced an outline on the SCS has been implemented at subnational levels, with varying degrees of limitations and effectiveness. The most institutionalized and comprehensive component of the SCS is confined to the economic sphere at national and local levels, in the form of a joint rewards and sanctions mechanism, based on red lists and blacklists for enterprises and individuals. Those in the red lists are categorized as having good regularity compliance records, while those blacklisted have poor records. The SCS more controversial aspect, the introduction of a social scoring system to improve social order and public trust, has been implemented at subnational levels to limited extents. For example, local PRC cities such as Rongkong and Suining had attempted to implement the social moral components as part of their SCS pilot project since 2014. The results were poorly received and resisted by the local population. It can be inferred that the adverse public reaction to the above-mentioned local pilot SCS projects could be one reason why the state has not been too assertive to implement the SCS on a national scale for nearly a decade. The state may have some concerns about social reactions from the widespread implementation of the SCS. The SCS is currently only punishing criminal and economic defaulters, which may explain why there is a high degree of acceptance of the SCS. Discussion on political economy approaches. Western media tend to focus on SCS authoritarian aspects that strengthen surveillance and undermine individual rights. The use of political economy lenses to view the SCS, in terms of state-society power relations and access to means of production, tend to align with narratives projected by Western media. Political economy approaches will interpret SCS as an infrastructure to further the PRC state apparatus and corporations to dominate PRC citizens in the economic and social life. Specifically, the SCS mandate for the state to centralize data, as means of production, in collaboration with corporations will enable them to exert more power and influence over PRC citizens. This can be interpreted as a form of data colonialism by the state in corporations. Discussion on cultural studies approaches. Cultural studies approaches appear to posit more positive views on the SCS. Broadly, the SCS has been described as a model of good governance, promoting economic compliance and social harmony, underpinned by Chinese social and moral values. In other examples, social psychology research methods to understand PRC citizens' public opinions of the SCS were generally positive. Research from cultural studies angle have indicated that PRC citizens may not be adverse against SCS, contrary to what the Western media narratives and political economy perspectives presume. That said, it is posited that most PRC citizens may not know the negative potential of SCS since their digital exposures are mainly confined within the Great Firewall of China. One can argue that the PRC government's propaganda for the SCS has been biased, instilling in the people that the SCS will have a positive impact on society and that there will be more trust between people. The notion of potential infringement of privacy and individual rights by the SCS does not appear to have reached widespread awareness among PRC citizens. It is posited that PRC citizens may become dissatisfied and resist the SCS if it is fully implemented. The state may be conscious of public sentiments against total control, which may explain why the SCS has not been fully implemented, especially on the social control front. Discussion on network society. Using Manuel Castell's network society as reference, the SCS can be considered a manifestation of an information society. This can be seen in the primacy of data information in the SCS, centralized by the state in corporations, that hold sway over the lives of PRC citizens. On a related note, Orgad and Reagers posited that the SCS represents a form of cybernetic citizenship that may diminish or even eliminate the agency of PRC citizens to negotiate with the state. They cautioned that this danger may also occur in liberal democracies. On the other hand, John Frank Weaver posited that the SCS, which may eventually be run by artificial intelligence, may not necessarily doom Chinese society to totalitarianism. There is potential for SCS to facilitate the formation of an AI middle class, which might lead to more positive developments in state-society relations in China. However, one can argue that technological determinism in these approaches ignores the socio-cultural forces at work in China. Discussion on critical political economy. Critical political economy, or CPE, which sees the economy as interrelated with political, social and cultural life rather than as a separate domain, can provide useful approaches to explore the SCS impact on PRC citizens. Existing CPE research on the SCS have highlighted the complexities and social tensions arising from power relations and Chinese moral values between state, corporate and citizen actors. This framing of the SCS as a contested space indicates that the SCS is by no means a straightforward instrument for the state and corporations to subjugate PRC citizens. In one study, which did field work including interviews with government officials, academics and citizens in a specific city in China, it was found that the risks involved in promoting social credit among the general populace are the greatest, compared with businesses and civil servants, thus limiting the city's efforts in implementing the SCS social component. Another study found that CCP members are less likely to support state-centered social credit systems compared with the public. These studies suggest the potential of agency among PRC citizens to resist the SCS authoritarian tendencies. More critical political economy. Via CP, we may be able to better understand the SCS and surface any potential for agency. We may get further insights on the complexity of state-society relations in China across national and subnational levels, as well as the power relations between the state, corporations, civil servants and citizens. For instance, research can be done to learn more about attitudes of PRC citizens via social psychology methods. What do Chinese citizens prioritize? Freedom or social harmony? That said, there are limitations in social psychology that it may be too positivist and ignore more abstract cultural values in Chinese society. Another approach that we wish to explore in detail is how Habermas' public sphere may relate to the SCS. Understanding the public sphere within the context of the SCS. Habermas argues that the public sphere is a space in which people can come together to rationally discuss issues that concern the common good. These ideas and discussions are transmitted via your legally granted rights, such as your freedom of speech, press and assembly by your government. To be in the public means to participate in discourse through state-formed formal institutions. When we think about the internet activities in China, we think about how it is heavily censored and regulated. While this is still the case, Stockman and Liu argue that even within Chinese social media applications, public discourse that talks about political issues and criticisms of the government still exist. Further, they found that users on Weibo can voice their opinion and challenge state autonomy over information due to the nature of the application that empowers its users to become a source and disseminator of information. Stockman and Liu's paper is interesting because it demonstrates the will of the people to their freedom of speech. Even though posts that pertain to sensitive and political topics tend to be restricted and deleted, it's important to acknowledge that these posts continue to pop up and spread. But to what extent can we call the cycle of posting and deleting freedom of speech? Moynihan and Patel argue that while Chinese users can sometimes have access to critical information via VPNs, this freedom is still largely illusory. Perhaps the Chinese cybersphere is an example in which the public sphere has been made much smaller due to state surveillance. People are only allowed to voice their opinions to the extent that it is non-critical towards the very same people who regulate the internet. Chinese users are allowed to speech, but a very limited sort of speech. Technological determinism and the peripheries. On the economical side, the interconnectivity of social media apps in China is something worth noting for. Applications such as WeChat are not just used for social interactions, but also for economical transactions. This means that the sorts of data that is being gathered by companies are all-encompassing, with the Chinese people needing to upload their IDs, bank accounts, etc. This super interconnectivity may prove to be dangerous as it becomes a slippery slope, as all the ingredients needed to control the citizen on a mass scale are already collected. It just becomes a question of when the powerful players choose to abuse their power. What does this mean for the public sphere? We have already demonstrated how the public sphere can diminish via state surveillance. In the status quo, there are still avenues in which the Chinese people can circumvent these surveillances. The state-regulated cybersphere is the public sphere, whereas platforms accessible via VPNs are the peripheries of the public sphere. But to the extreme hypothetical, we can expect the public sphere and its peripheries to completely vanish. How does this look like? On the individual end, the crackdown on speech might become too dictated and oppressive to the extent that any single thought that is slightly anti-state will be censored. In terms of execution, VPNs and words that are currently used to circumvent surveillance will be constantly regulated and perhaps even banned to the extent that Chinese users will not have access to VPNs anymore. In this hypothetical, we argue that the public sphere and its peripheries have vanished, as there are no more channels for people to voice their own individual opinions, and there is no access for people to escape from their canonical cybersphere. The public sphere has vanished, now what? Habermas argues that the public sphere is the basis of the democratic process. Does this mean if the public sphere vanishes, the state is necessarily undemocratic? Instead of questioning the relationship between concept of democracy, freedom of expression and the public sphere, we should ask, what is it that the Chinese citizens prioritize? Freedom of speech or social harmony? In research studies, Asian countries tend to experience higher levels of internet censorship and surveillance, all in the name of social stability. This is analogous to the concept of Leviathan as posited by Thomas Hobbes, in which relies on the social contract, whereby citizens must give away some of their rights, so they are ensured security and harmony by the state. Within the context of China's SCS scheme, it is arguable that at its core, the SCS scheme fundamentally respects the social contract theory, as Chinese web users must give up a considerable amount of their freedom of expression in the name of political stability. In the same way that modern scholars view the Leviathan as authoritarian, the same may be argued that our hypothetical Chinese surveillance state is equally authoritarian. But interestingly, a study conducted by Pan and Xu indicates that Chinese surveyors prefer their freedom to speech even if it meant social and political instability. Furthermore, the finding also indicated that there are growing sentiments of dissatisfaction over the incumbent government as opposed to previous terms. What does this mean? The right to freedom of expression and speech and the avenue to channel these individual ideas are still regarded as important to the Chinese surveyors. If such a hypothetical state might come to fruition, the disappearance of the public sphere will greatly affect a lot of the Chinese web users and breed strong sentiments of resentment over the state. People do care about their freedom and go to great lengths to express it. Conclusion. We are inclined towards the view that if the SCS is implemented in its full form with comprehensive economic and social controls, PRC citizens will reject and resist, especially against the social controls. In this light, more research can be done to better understand Chinese society, how PRC citizens may react to the SCS economic and social moral controls. Based on what we learned so far about the various theoretical frameworks on how it may apply to China's social credit system, as well as non-exhaustive existing research on this topic, we posit that critical political economy approaches may be more adequate to get further insights on how PRC citizens' attitudes and reactions to authoritarian tendencies of the SCS. Additionally, we posit that the public sphere in China may disappear with the full implementation of the SCS. This will cause strong resistance from the Chinese public.